So this year they're going to be saying Stanley Cup champion New York Islanders, and it's going to be, it's going to bring back that chill. But it's going to be a different approach. I mean, I could sit back and
Bryan Trottier, the beloved Islanders center who refused to be knocked out of the game of ice hockey, coming back season after season, is someone who needs no introduction. The Canadian-American is someone who has not only represented both countries on the rink, but has his fair share of fans and detractors on both sides of the border. After all, what can you expect when a player has represented the best of both the United States and Canada, but now has to pick between the two? But before we go on with the story of this choice that Trottier had to make, be sure to like and subscribe for more history of hockey icons. In his case, Trottier was faced with this choice when playing in the Canada Cup, which pitted national teams against each other in a tournament to determine who is the best. The choice that Trottier made here would leave many of his fans aghast, but that is something that we will cover later. Trottier played in the NHL for 18 seasons, almost 2 decades, a spellbindingly long time for any player. Throughout most of this period, Trottier stuck with the Islanders, leading them to 4 Stanley Cup wins. His later career would involve stints with the Penguins as well, with whom he also won 2 Stanley Cups late in his career, a monumental achievement. Throughout the period of his career, Bryan Trottier would establish himself a serious and dedicated player to the sport of ice hockey. He would go on to score multiple NHL records, sharing the NHL record for points in a single period with 6 points, 4 goals and 2 assists. He would also be one of the 8 NHL players with multiple 5-goal games. All of this is made more surprising by the fact that most of Trottier's record breaks and spotlight moments came from the early or middle periods of his career. This was where he was seen as dominating the ice rink alongside his Islanders teammates. Trottier's speed combined with his aggressive style of play could not be matched by anyone on the rink. Bryan Trottier's list of achievements would be just as long as his career, but so would the number of controversies that would come during his career. Despite always staying ahead of his opponents on the rink, there were just some things that even a maverick like Bryan Trottier could not outrun in his life, no matter how much he tried to do so. The most famous controversy that Bryan Trottier had been involved in, but perhaps not the most damning one, was the issue of him playing for the U.S. national team over the Canadian one in the 1984 Canada Cup. As we have mentioned before, fans of franchises, teams, and players can be devoted to their favorites to extreme lengths. Trottier was no different, as he had distinguished himself on the Rock again and again and had fans all over North America. These fans began to see Trottier as one of their own and a representative of themselves. Just as important to these fans are their national identities, which they often hold near and dear to them. It was here that Trottier would have a difficult decision to make, one that was bound to make fans of his angry on one side of the U.S.-Canada border in any case. He would have to choose between the U.S. and Canada when deciding on which national team to play with. Trottier had been born in Canada but raised in the U.S. Him choosing the U.S. over his country of birth was seen as a disgrace by many Canadians who viewed Trottier as not taking his Canadian heritage seriously. For Trottier, however, the issue was simple. He wanted to honor the country he was brought up in, and he wanted to honor his dual citizenship, having just gotten a citizenship to the U.S. Trottier's wife was also a U.S. national, which had made him inclined to play for the team. As per his words, he wanted to test out the U.S. team and see how they would play on the national stage when compared with greats such as that of Canada and the Soviet Union. Canadian fans of Trottier were not convinced by this argument, however, and they would, over the course of things, take this perceived betrayal by him very seriously to their egos and their national pride. Many used to see Trottier as a Canadian icon, and others would even try to boycott games of his in an effort to drive down his popularity. These moves would have little impact in the long run, but for Canadian fans of Trottier, this perceived insult to their nation would always remain with them whenever the name of Trottier was brought up in conversation or on the TV screen. To them, their national identity had been insulted, and Trottier had simply chosen the more prestigious option. This was especially highlighted when the NHL, while having a much greater presence in the U.S., has seen its fair share of Canadians dominate the game and make it their own. To them, Trottier could have chosen this path, but instead chose the easier way that would grant him more fame. If you thought all of the controversies facing Trottier would have been this mild, then you should lock in, because representation decisions aren't the only thing that have sullied the image of this player. In 1987, at the peak of the rhetoric of the war against drugs, Trottier was arrested and charged with cocaine possession. For an athlete, their image is everything. It determines their marketability, and their reputation determines how much they can be used to sell the name of the franchise they are playing for and its sponsors. For this reason, many athletes go above and beyond to project a clean image both on and off the rink, even if that may be far from the truth. Trottier had clearly failed in this, and at a crucial moment, when national rhetoric around the war on drugs was just ramping up. While the change pinned on Trottier could not stick in court due to a lack of evidence being presented with them, and they had to be eventually dropped. The impact in the moment of these changes had an impact as Trottier's image in the media was tarnished, and he could not rescue himself from the media circus that grew up around these allegations. Drug use amongst professionals is something that is strictly looked down upon, especially since NHL and other sports leagues look to market themselves to kids and families in order to grow their base demographics and capture new shares. This makes it especially pertinent for them to clean up their image when it comes to their star players. Trottier being faced with drug charges meant that he could not protect his image, and hence was facing a lot of pushback, not only from his fans, but the league as well. While over time this issue faded into the background, especially as these charges could not stick, you can guess the severity of this matter by the environment of the late 80s and the various public awareness schemes around drug use in the era. After this period, there was an increased focus on keeping a clean image of the player within the NHL. While this case did not tarnish the image of Bryan Trottier, as it could not be proven in court, the press coverage did him no favors. Players were extra careful about their image from this point on and placed a lot of emphasis on how they presented the theme. This was pertinent at the time, as no sponsor would want to be attached to a team or player that could be marketed to a new demographic, and hence give them greater brand exposure as a result. Trottier's personal dealings were not the only sign of controversy that had him caught up in the middle of a firestorm over this time. Oftentimes it was his style of play and how he taught others that affected him and those around him. This can be addressed by talking about the specific issues that deleted his coaching style from those under him. Trottier was hired as the assistant coach of the Colorado Avalanche, as he had shifted to coaching after his retirement from playing on the field. He had hoped that he could use the skills he gained from all this time coaching to develop the skills of bright new young players in defending their titles, and this seemed like a likely move given his association with the game. With the Colorado Avalanche, however, things would not play out so easily, and soon he was facing a mutiny in his hands from the very players that he was supposed to build up. Trottier's time with the Colorado Avalanche would not be the period of smooth sailing that many would excerpt from a player so experienced in ice hockey and one who practically lived his life on the ice. Instead, Trottier would rather face a number of allegations that he was not an effective coach and employed a teaching style that was actively seen as domineering towards his players. Something that many playing under him did not appreciate. Perhaps wanting too much out of his players, Trottier was seen as being too critical of his players, to the point where he would demand too much out of them whenever they were in a practice session. This would obviously lead to conflict in the team, and the Avalanche players consistently clashed with the coaching style of Trottier. They blamed him for being an ineffective coach who did not know how to build up his players and to polish them effectively. Over time, Trottier would have these conflicts more and more with the Avalanche players, and this would set the stage for the eventual departure of Trottier as the coach of the Avalanche players. Despite everything said about his time with the Avalanche, it has to be made that Trottier's period with the Avalanches was not a complete failure. In fact, as assistant coach to the team, he had led them to a Stanley Cup victory. However, perhaps this was a sign of things, where Trottier expected too much from the team, and when they would fail to achieve such monumental results, he would be very critical of the team, eventually leading to conflict within the team over and over again. In spite of everything, it can be said that the methods of Trottier did lead to results for the team, even if they were deemed to be controversial at times. Trottier's time on the ice rink had been marked by extensive aggressive plays. It's no surprise that he would want to emulate that when he would be betraying his players as well. For Trottier, he was simply doing the job that he had been hired to do, and that was to develop these players. He had done that in the moment by making sure that the Avalanches won the Stanley Cup, bringing home glory to themselves and their fans. If this meant suffering hardship under him, then that was a small price to pay in the eyes of Trottier. Trottier was player-motivated, winning the game at cost, and this made him one of the greats. Before we continue, for more insights into the icons of hockey, like and subscribe. Trottier now serves as assistant coach to the Buffalo Sabres, a position he has served in since 2014. Clearly, it can be said that teams still see the value in a player like Trottier and what his approach may bring towards players, even if many players may disagree with the style of his coaching. This can also be linked to a larger point about Trottier's style of play, one that has often been described as physical and aggressive. Ice hockey as a sport is not stranger to aggressive plays and players getting physical with one another. This is seen as a part of the game and even encouraged, as it is a part of the wider tradition of ice hockey. But even within such an environment, Trottier was seen as extra aggressive to the point where it would cause incidents like fights and penalties, leading to accusations of dirty play often hurling at Trottier. Perhaps the most famous such incident involving Mike Trottier happened at the 1983 Stanley Cup Finals. This was where Trottier was so aggressive against the Boston Bruins that he accidentally slashed his own teammate, Mike Bossy, causing him a significant injury. This was just one of the many incidents on the rink involving Mike Trottier, and many of these would devolve on ice fights with the other team, who of course did not take kindly to the aggressive behaviors of Mike Trottier. But given his exceptional record, it was due to this very style of play that Trottier was able to secure his record score. Growing up in the town of Val-Marie, Trottier is of Cree Métis Native American descent, something that he has mentioned quite often and that he takes pride in. In his childhood, Trottier experienced quite a bit of racism for his native identity, but that only made him more proud of it. Trottier would start playing ice hockey with his father when he was young. This would later translate into a career for the Climax hockey team in Climax, Saskatchewan, and for the Swift Current Broncos. This junior career would give Trottier plenty of practice to then venture onto a professional career in the NBA. Trottier was drafted into the NHL in the 1974 draft with the Islanders. The team would be his home for most of his career, as he would play 15 seasons in the NHL with it. Trottier would distinguish himself in just the first season for the team when he set an NHL rookie record of 95 points and won the Calder Memorial Trophy as the NHL's Rookie of the Year of 75-7.
Against the Toronto Maple Leafs in playoffs, Stanley Cup playoff games, and sitting in the end of my seat and everyone talking about Bryan Trottier.
Even Wayne Gretzky would be full of praise for Trottier. Trottier's time with the Islanders would be marked by a number of seasons where he would soar, as in the 78-79 seasons when he scored 134 points, earning himself the Art Ross Trophy as the top scorer of the league, and the Hart Memorial Trophy, making himself the NHL MVP in the league. Throughout this time with the Islander, Trottier would win 4 Stanley Cups. This would showcase the increasing star of the team during his time with them. It showed to the team and everyone else that Trottier was a strength for them.
You know, I sit back and think, now we're going to go into another building. And I mean, it was great playing Montreal because, you know, it started the game, the Stanley Cup champion.
The team would celebrate their wins in style. Showing no signs of slowing down, Trottier would score 50 goals in the 81-82 seasons, not slowing down, no matter who was in his way. Trottier's time at the Islanders would be marked by his partnership with Clark Gillies and Mike Bossy, who collectively would be known as Trio Grande. This trio would be the one that would score the Islanders many of their victories during the time that they were active and playing for the Islanders. Trottier's performance, however, would start to go down as his age caught up to him, and following his 13th season, his decline increased. This decline in the fortunes of Trottier would result in the Islanders releasing Trottier from his contract, believing that his best years were now behind him. His final years would be with the Pittsburgh Penguins, where he played till the 93-94 season, winning 2 Stanley Cups with the team in the process in the year 91 and 92. Trottier would eventually be inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame.
The hockey memoirs of Bryan Trottier began far from the mills of Steeltown, a native of Val-Marie, Saskatchewan.
At his retirement, Trottier's points would be ranked as the 6th highest in the NHL. Bryan Trottier's career is a mix of searing highs mixed in with a number of controversies that show this image. In Bryan Trottier, one can see an icon of ice hockey who developed his technique and built up on it, even if he faced controversy off of the rink.